morning, everyone, and welcome to our backyard. Today's video is our July garden tour. And what I like to do is start from the same reference point in each garden tour, and that is my back concrete patio. It's a small patio. And I just like to pan the backyard. And that gives me a great frame of reference to see how everything has been growing and blooming. I can't believe it's already time for the July garden tour. And I like to start in a different area of my backyard each month. And this time I'm going to start around the corner, which we call our south garden bed. And this is the month I can say that I truly enjoy this south garden bed. So as I turn the corner and I come into this area, one of the things that really strikes me, and I've been very pleased with it for a while now, is our giant milkweed. We have this in our yard for our monarch caterpillars, and I've been really pleased with it this year. So now is the time when this back garden bed really starts getting lush. And I have the coral honeysuckle along the side. And then I'm going to go through the various pieces to this back corner. And I'm going to start in the back. As you can see, I have some Tithonia here. And these were just seeds that I had started indoors. And the seedlings didn't look that great. And I brought them out to a couple of places in my yard. And Tithonia grows really well in the landscape. But the highlights of this are my firebush, which is all back here. And the firebush is blooming gorgeously. The pollinators are on it all the time. You can see a nice bumblebee down there. It's a little too early for much of anything except the bees are out already working. But I love firebush down here in the southern garden. And I've mentioned I have two different types of firebush. And I do not know the varieties. This one we had purchased at our local nursery and it didn't have the variety. It's a wholesaler nursery. And this one we purchased at Lowe's and it just had just the firebush. And then the one in the corner over there is a volunteer. So this back garden is really starting to come into its own. And I haven't mentioned too much about this plant, which is a Cape honeysuckle that's growing up our trellis, because it doesn't start to really star until fall and winter. So I'll be able to show the Cape honeysuckle at a later point in time. I'm going to try to get up from this perspective and show back in here. There's our other firebush. This middle one has a really narrow leaf and it blooms way more, has way more blooms than the two on the edges, which have a more broader leaf. And this Tithonia, oh my goodness, what a star it's been in the garden. It is a pollinator magnet. All right. In this south bed, I have mostly plants in pots, but I do have some in the ground. I do have an April Nights salvia. I do have a purple lantana, which is back in here. And I do have native salvia, which is the purple here. I broke off one of my tips of my mounding lantana and I just stuck it here and it's growing nicely. So in my pots I have a blue porterweed. I've got some, golly, 1, 2, 3. Do I have 3? Yes. 3 different butterfly bushes. And I'm going to come around the front. A few days ago, the Mexican bird of paradise here, which is this plant, was blooming beautifully. And there's still a few blooms, a couple of blooms left here. I do have another group that's going to be blooming shortly. And this is a really, I think, nice summer plant. It's airy. After it blooms, it has these interesting seed pods. There's a lot of interest and color in this plant. And it is a pollinator magnet. And then I do have multiple cigar plants or Kufia in the yard. And this is a pollinator favorite in particular, a butterfly favorite. And then my blue porterweed has been blooming beautifully after I fertilized all the porterweed. And then down in the front, I have little Joe Pye weed that's starting to bloom. This came back from last year. A couple volunteer coleus. Here is Supertunia Vista bubblegum. I wanted to try it. I've had to cut it back because it got really spindly. And then a lantana. I'm going to step back. And this part of the garden is really starting to get lush. And the pollinators visit it all throughout the day. So now in this July garden tour, I'm going to come along the fence and then I am going to go this way into the yard. And you'll notice I have a couple of pots here. This one is a hardy hibiscus that I think is almost completely done blooming. It has started to die back at some of the tips. My purple porterweed, I had mentioned we were gone and it was on a blooming hiatus, but it is starting to bloom again after I fertilized. Very happy with that. In my previous video, I talked about this small garden bed, which is a 4 feet by 4 feet garden bed. And I went through all the plants in here. But at the time, my blue chiffon was not flowering, and it has started to flower. This is a Rose of Sharon. And this is the reason I planted this and created this bed, was for this shrub. I loved the color and the shape and what the blooms looked like. So I'm so excited that it has started to grow finally and bloom. As I look at our oval garden bed that we call the tree bed, because a large maple tree used to be here. I do like the balance of it, and I love how the pollinators are at this tree bed all the time, all throughout the day. In particular, I've mentioned in the past about this native flower, and this is called a Greg's Mist flower. The butterflies flock to this. There are butterflies on this all the time throughout the day. I purchased this as one plant, and it is spreading throughout the bed. I do like that, but that's just a mention for some of you that maybe might not care for that. You can easily cut it back though, and keep it contained. So what I have on either side is I have mounding lantana, and I love mounding lantana because it has this beautiful habit that mounds. It doesn't sprawl all over. And I have the red on this side and the rose on this side. The rose is not, it's gone through a little bit of a lull here, and it will flush back out in flowers soon enough. And then I have my salvia, which is my Amistad. The purple, both the purple and the pink. And then here is my David Verity Kufia that is almost as tall as I am. And this gets full sun. And I'm going to come around to this side. And this gorgeous group is my Salvia leucantha, or Mexican bush sage. And it flowered gorgeously in the early spring. And it's now just starting to create blooms again. This has such a nice leaf texture on it. So one of the things that I mentioned is I had planted Tithonia, and I now will always have Tithonia in my butterfly garden. I can't imagine not having it now after watching to see what it attracts. The problem is I have torch, the Tithonia rondifolia, which is the torch variety, and it has grown over 8 feet tall, and it's just towering over everything. The interesting thing though is I do have passion flower here also, and the passion vine is winding itself all the way through here, which is great because this gives the caterpillars more areas to hide. So this cottonleaf passion vine, which you can see this purple little kind of lavender colored flower, is a huge pollinator magnet. And then way high up here, I have a purple passion vine, which is a hybrid called Incense. So I have 2 passion vines that are along this trellis bed. And I will not have Tithonia here in this location again, but I just can't bring myself to pull it out. So it does shade. If I look down here, it does somewhat shade my Flamicanthus bushes. And so that's another reason why I am not going to plant Tithonia here again. I need to figure out a better spot for this, but I love this flower for what it's doing in my garden. So right next to our passion vine trellis is our cardinal climber. And our cardinal climber is starting to come more into its own. The foliage is still not as vibrant and lush as it was last year at this exact same time, but it is coming on, and our hummingbird visits it every day. All the flowers that are in bloom, in addition to our Kufia and Rucellia. So she comes every day for this flower. And this is called Rucellia, or a firecracker plant. And I guess she's got a taste for this, because this is one of the first things that she goes to. Although she doesn't visit all of the tubular flowers that we have in bloom, which we have quite a lot. So as I continue on from our cardinal climber trellises, which we have 5 different panels, I've got 2 plants over here that are really growing, but they're not blooming a lot. And these 2 are our Mexican flame vine and our red mandevilla. And the Mexican flame vine, which I have noticed, is it has a beautiful flush of flowers, and then you have to deadhead it back. And anyway, for me, it's at least a month of reprieve before it starts flowering again. So I am hopeful that it is going to start flowering. The vine itself is gorgeous and healthy. It's growing nice and tall. And then my mandevilla, it is just on a growth tear, not so much a blooming tear. And I do fertilize this once a month, and next week is fertilizing time again. So that's probably why it is not blooming as much at the moment. So this is the south side of the yard. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over closer to the house. I do have all of my plants in pots and go through these plants. My Turk's cap have been real pitiful this year. I do have blooms on them, but last year they were gorgeous and they had blooms. They were just covered in blooms. So I'm going to have to do some more research on what is going on with my Turk's cap. It is behaving like fall and starting to lose its leaves already. Kind of like my hardy hibiscus, which is unusual. Next to my Turk's cap, I have a couple of planters. One is a coral porterweed that kind of hides my watering zones. And then I have a planter. And in this planter, I have the sparkling amethyst Superbena, which I've been really happy with. And then a dragon's breath celosia, which has been growing also just wonderfully. But I am very much thinking I am going to have this sparkling amethyst verbena. It's called a Superbena from Proven Winners. And try not to pan too quickly. But over in my trellis bed where I've got all that Tithonia, I am going to put that between my Flamicanthus. So it's going to be more low to the ground. And that way I'll have passion vine up top. And then I will also have the sparkling amethyst Superbena down low. And then the Flamicanthus mid-range. So I'm hoping that's going to work. Okay, as I look at my my planters, one plant that I have been really happy with how it has grown and it is filling out the container is this Terrenia or wishbone flower. And it has a tubular pretty flower. It goes through multiple flushes. And I just love how it is filling out this planter. The other thing I've noticed is the hybrids that are Salvia graniticas, and this happens to be a Moroccan fuchsia, doesn't appear to love our very, very hot and humid weather. It doesn't seem to do as well. Right next to it, I have Mystic Spires, and Mystic Spires is loving its life. It's filled with pollinators all day long. And then the other thing that I did is I did want to trial having petunias to see what a Supertunia Vista would do. This happens to be Paradise. I do love the flower color, but I don't like how the foliage looks and how it gets tired. And so when I look at what is required to keep this looking nice in the container versus something like the Terrenia, I would pick this any day. And then I have my 3 large pots. I'm going to come down here. I've got very large pots of my tropical hibiscus. And as you can see, I have multiple blooms on them daily. So I have a pink, yellow with a red center, and then red. And I love tropical hibiscus in the yard. And then on the end, I have an autumn azalea, which is an encore azalea, and then a David Verity Kufia plant, and it does not get full sun. It does have a lot of dappled shade, and as you can see, that really affects not only leaf production but bloom production. I was hoping it was going to get enough sun here, but this is about the cutoff, whereas the tropical hibiscus get lots of wonderful sun. Unfortunately, this one, not so much. As I continue to look through my yard, I do have some Swedish ivy that I have in pots that I have hanging from my tree. I've got a Mona lavender, and now I'm going to go over to my shade garden. Because this is in the shade, on this end I have plants that I am either getting acclimated or I have moved because they moved to this location because they've not liked where they've been, or they're new plants. So I have new plants in here. I have plants that got a little bit scorched. This is my sassafras tree, and it got a little bit scorched, so I needed to move it over here. It didn't like the intense sun. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I have my shade garden, and I really like the colors I have mentioned in the past on my shade garden. And I start out with a couple of pots of shrimp plants. And my shrimp plants are really starting to put on new growth. They're flowering, still flowering. They've been flowering since February when I purchased them. I'm really happy with them. So now I'm going to turn the corner here. And as you know, I have found that in this shade garden, I have really good luck with both caladiums and coleus. And pretty much I have coleus planted in ground, and I've used different colors and textures. And I also have a couple of sweet potato vines that I'm really happy with. So I've got both the purple and the lime green. And the lime green goes all the way down to the other end of the bed. And I do like how this contrasts out. So I will put pots in the garden interspersed with my plantings. Back here is my Forsythia sage, also known as Salvia madrensis. And that blooms in the fall. It's already starting to get some bloom spikes on it, and it's a beautiful yellow colored bloom. I also like looking at the shade garden from this vantage point, looking across the whole yard. And then I do like to come through the back, because this vantage point is also a fun vantage point to come and look out. One of my favorite caladiums that I have potted is this one. It's in a nice tall pot in the back of the shade bed. And I don't know what it is about this caladium. It's called Dipped in Wine. It's a shade caladium. And I love, absolutely love the colors and the textures. And each leaf is just so large and so different in their colorations. I just think this is a gorgeous caladium. I'm so happy with it. I'm just going to do one quick panning this way of the shade bed. I don't talk about this coleus as much, but I love the color of that leaf. It does pop in the garden, but you can appreciate it more the closer up you are. Okay, now on to the north bed. This garden bed was the first garden bed that we put in the spring of 2021. And it's also the bed that suffered the most when we were gone. And it didn't have enough water delivered to it, and I did lose a plant or two in here. And it was just shocking to come back and see how rough the plants were. But we've been watering and taking care of them. And this predominantly is all perennials. I don't have any annuals planted in this garden bed. I do have some. My Powwow Wildberry coneflowers are starting to come, but they have not flowered well this year on this end of the garden. I do have coneflowers on the complete other south end of the garden that have done very well. And my bush salvia here is okay, which is a Salvia grigii hybrid with red flowers. But it also is just okay. It's not doing fantastic. I removed a butterfly bush in this pot and I replaced it with this porterweed, and I am just happy that I did that, because I have not had luck in my garden, no matter where I have placed them in my garden. I have not had luck with them. And with them, I mean the butterfly bushes. So this porterweed is loving its life, and it's doing so well, and the pollinators are on it all the time. So that was a good replacement. This is a cassia bush. It has not started blooming yet. Late summer, mid to late summer is when it will start. So I am hopeful it will get started soon. And then our cardinal climber vines along the fence have been starting to put on some really nice growth. And I'll want them in full bloom in another month or so for hummingbird migration. And then under my large cypress tree, I use this as a staging area because it is pretty much a full shade area. And I use this for plants that I'm starting out to get them acclimated. And I recently was at my favorite nursery and they had beautiful white veined Dutchman's pipevine, which is a ground cover. And so, of course, I had to get some. And I needed one more Flamicanthus, and I was able to get that. And I was so happy. These I've had out so it's acclimated to our garden, and I will be planting them in the next few days into my shade bed. So thank you for joining me for my July garden tour. Even though we were gone for 12 days in July, and our garden did suffer some, for the most part, I've been very pleased with our garden and how it's performed and how it's held up in our heat, high humidity. So I hope you all have a fantastic day today. Hopefully you can get into your gardens. And I hope to see you soon.